Hello and welcome to Future Commerce, the podcast at the crossroads of culture and commerce. I'm Brian.
I'm Philip, and of course, yeah, the future of commerce, I think, is what we're all about here. Obviously, and the world of the culture of commerce too is something we're all about. Just as a reminder, we have our event coming up at Art Basel, the greatest cultural event, especially in the art world, but also emerging is sort of the place to be for brands, brand creators, and operators. If you're an innovator in the brand space, we want to invite you. Come on out to our event at Art Basel, Miami Beach, December 6th through 8th. We're going to have an incredible time. More information, get it over at futurecommerce.com/muses. And we are going to explore how brands are innovating and how innovation and technology have become a form of a muse that's making us inspired and find meaning and purpose in the world. Brands are our muses, futurecommerce.com/muses. And we'll see you at Art Basel, December 6th through 8th. Another muse in the world of brand building and this new area of competitive intelligence and how businesses are getting data and insights so they can make better decisions is none other than the co-founder and CEO of Particle. Of course, Josh Wilson is here on the show here today. Welcome to the show, Josh. And I'm really excited to hear about how you're thinking more strategically and helping brands make better decisions in the e-commerce ecosystem. Welcome, Josh.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let's talk about competitive intelligence because I think once upon a time, when my parents, I grew up in a retail family, and we always looked for the secret shoppers who was coming in and spying on us. Uh, is that easier or harder today in the e-commerce world?
It's both. So, in terms of competition, it's quite harder. Just with globalization and kind of Shopify's mantra to add a store in everyone's garage. Your next competitor can come from anywhere. Where I feel like historically there were capital requirements and technology kind of barriers of entry that prevented that. But then on the flip side, the shift to online gives you kind of a great pulse on signals and what everyone else is doing. So you can, use a robot to scan all your competitors' websites in, a fraction of a second rather than sending in that proverbial James Bond spy to go write down prices in a notebook, which people still do. Just so you know, that actually is not quite out of the industry
Wow.
yet. So yeah, I think it's harder and easier in multiple ways, and I think it's great for brands just to be thinking about and to have a strategy around.
Yeah, I think you're
And
dead on. And there are new tools now, as you've mentioned, to do this. Um, do you find that that how brands and retailers are looking at competitive data is changing based on the new types of information or the ease of access to information that we now have? Is it making it easier to take that data and do something with it, or is it actually making it harder and more complex?
Honestly, the shift I've seen is the brands that do it well tend to be almost more cerebral. Meaning, I do feel like it is the smarter brands really take advantage of it, and it becomes a massive kind of advantage for them over everyone else. And it's kind of interesting. And then with the legacy players, we're fortunate enough to have a handful of kind of publicly traded retailers as customers, and they're now trying to kind of adopt their strategy to catch up to some of the kind of quick D2C brands that are growing, 200, 300% year over year. So yeah, I think it is changing quite a lot.
there's a,
Hmm.
a a time where I spent in sort of the e-commerce ecosystem in the early aughts where it was really easy, especially when you had like dedicated servers that had limited bandwidth. It was really easy to see when your competitors were crawling your website.
Yeah.
It was a big that was a big part of our an IT challenge back in the day
hmm
is that you would be hammered with these bots that would crawl the site, and you kind of knew what they were up to. How does that work today? How is it any different than it was 15 years ago in e-commerce? And how does a product like Particle get its data in the ecosystem without sort of being known as a surveiller, but as a value add for the ecosystem?
So Um, honestly, the truth of the matter is, from an engineering perspective, it's essentially impossible to block bots without blocking customers. Unless you put everything through a log behind kind of a login portal, it really is impossible. But you can block probably 95 to 99% of crawlers quite simply, actually, because there's kind of a, as in all things, there's kind of a level of sophistication that grows. So it is something stores should be cognizant of. It is something that they should take those measures to try and kind of cut the low hanging fruit. But the matter of fact is I would focus more on how can you use it to your benefit, because just telling you from inside the industry, it's impossible to block it without blocking a real human.
Hmm. That's
Yeah.
interesting. Talk to us a little bit more about using it to your benefit. What is
Yeah.
describe what that means?
Yeah, so maybe I can kind of explain by virtue of what started the company, why the genesis, and so essentially what happened. I'm actually not a commerce person historically. I actually spent most of my time in the machine learning space and tech. However, my wife is actually the COO of a little e-commerce company. It's based in Bountiful, Utah. They do dancewear for like little girls that go to dance class. And COVID happened. We're locked at home. We finished watching Tiger King, and you're trying to figure, what the heck should I do with the rest of my day? So started kind of hammering on her problems, and what I found was, for her business, and I found this to be true with most brands, they're extremely focused on growth, and I could optimize their ads, and I could do little improvements that would help them 10, 15, 20%. But when they would launch a new product, that was a game changer for them. They could double their business in a month, with a real hot product. So really what I started looking at is, okay, how can I use data to say, hey, this product customers will want to buy. And so it's you need to look at your own data, and then what I figured is, well, why don't I look at everyone else and see what's working for them? And so that's to answer your question, Brian. That's where I would start with is, okay, what can I gather from others, and pick the best strategies that make sense for me.
In my days in sort of managing dev team, QA at a brand when we had IT. Again, I'm the old guy in the room. Um, we used to have to perform all of those functions, like everything in e-commerce today,
Totally.
as an internal facet of our business. So competitive intelligence was something that we owned, right? We wrote software that were
Hmm.
crawlers that went and examined a lot of things. It wasn't just our competitors; it was also our retail partners to make sure that they were abiding by promo and discounting and map
Totally.
pricing policies, right? So there was a lot of ownership of our internal technology that powered that sort of not just enforcement, but also understanding our competitive landscape. But today, like everything else in e-commerce, there is not a necessary component within the brand to own that
Yeah.
type of technology. You can license that technology or that data from others who are already doing it and doing it well.
What I found is, retail is the second largest part of our economy behind real estate. It is the largest employer of private employer in the country.
Hmm.
It's and typically, as most brands are working with very tight margins, right? There's not a lot of area to make real big mistakes. So when we work with brands, they're typically doing one or two launches a year. And if they screw it up, they can try again in 6 months or next year. But that's an eternity in our market and in our world. So it's very important that the few tries you actually have, you hit nail on the head. And so where we come into play is we say, hey, let's look at what is working everywhere else. Let's look at, most of your competitors have thousands of SKUs. And the fact of the matter is they typically make the majority of their money on just a handful. So let's start there, right? Let's take those and use those as a launching point. And we found those launches to be much, much, much more successful, uh, rather than kind of just going off of someone's idea that has no data to back it up.
So by gathering competitive intelligence, you're looking at what others are doing in your space, and you're able to discern like, okay, that might fit, that might not fit. Do you have any sort of recommendations around criteria for like absorbing that data. If you're only got
Yeah.
these two big launches a year, that and you're
Yeah.
focused in on these key products, there's got to be a way for brands and retailers to recognize some, like, when something that they get back is actually gonna be a fit, because like, we talked about this a ton on Future Commerce. Context is
Yeah.
everything. So just because it
Right.
worked for a competitor doesn't necessarily mean it will work for you. What are those contextual markers that help someone determine whether something's going to work for them or not?
Yeah, let me tell a story to kind of illustrate your point because you're spot on, Brian. So we worked with a brand very early on, and this brand makes backpacks. Okay, phenomenal backpacks, and they were looking to expand into different product categories. So they used our data. They went and tracked a bunch of men's clothing brands. Okay, they used that and they went and launched a shirt, a pant, and a jacket. Okay, now the data suggested that hey, the shirts would sell very well, right? Because they were tracking t-shirt companies. Okay, total bias there. Of course, they launched them. All three did okay, but the jacket crushed, right? And the reason is because when they interviewed their customers, they said, "Hey, when I'm using your backpack, I typically have a jacket on, right?" And it just seemed like there wasn't quite the cognitive leap for their
Mm,
customer base. Like if you kind of apply Clayton Christensen's jobs to be done theory, it was a very closely related
mhm,
job to what you're trying to accomplish. So we've actually tried to solve that with AI, to be honest. So typically, what we'll do is we ingest our customers' data and we will look at the products they're selling and the product types. And when you're looking at a competitor, we can call out and say, hey, this competitor is materialistically different than you. And so you should actually take that lens when you view kind of the insights from there. And with that, we've been able to kind of guide customers towards product types that we feel like better overlap with their business, make more sense for their customers to buy, and kind of a natural progression of the business.
It's
mm,
I mean, not to like overstate it, but that's kind of I'm given to hyperbole. In that way, if you can become a bit of a market maker, you can see particle can see trends as they're developing. People can sort of contextualize whether those trends are applicable for their business based on all kinds of criteria. I'm sure they have their own context, like Brian said. Um,
Mhm.
but then there's also this challenge of lead time and the decision you make today and how long it takes before that product lands and it's ready to sell.
Yeah.
So I think some of that too is how much of that do you take into account is sort of the recency bias of a trend and how durable it is. How do you help people? Are they? It's just it's their agency. They have to make up decisions based on what they think works for them and their customers.
No, so in our world, really our largest benefit is if our customers are happy and want to keep coming back, right? And so the way we've tried to solve it is we actually do a product life cycle calculation. And so what we're actually looking at is okay, what is this product nearing the apex of his life cycle?
mm.
Suggesting, if I were to go create this and it takes 2 months to build it and put it on a boat and get it here, by the time I launch it, is it going to be gone, right? Or is the hype going to be dead? So we've actually come up with some kind of leading indicators to say, hey, this product is kind of reaching its apex versus products that you people will restock, sell out, and that cycle will just continue into the foreseeable future. So it's really important, Philip. The way we try and attack it is calling out where we think the product is in its own life cycle.
Interesting. So you're doing this on a retailer and brand by brand basis,
Yeah,
but you're also, I would imagine, collecting aggregate stats as well about the industry, given how much how much data you have.
yeah,
What kinds of trends are you seeing in changing consumer behavior around purchasing, and is that data relevant in
yeah.
aggregate, or is the contextual analysis that you're offering really the more important thing for each brand to look at?
Yeah, what awesome question. So let me kind of give you an example. So in June, we actually saw kind of industry wide the color pink start selling like crazy. Uh and which I didn't
Hmm.
understand, but you everyone can probably now draw the connection. It was the Barbie movie, right? And we had brands. So we saw pink start selling like crazy. And then we had brands that were kind of the major capturers of that, like a Skims, for example. And if you went and looked on Skims website, what they did is they basically took all the pink products, put them in a collection for Barbie, and those products sold off the shelves. Now the thing is, those products actually hadn't been selling very well before. It was a very clever way to use existing inventory, package it slightly different, and
Mm,
sell, right? And other brands mimic that and has similar kind of responses. So yeah, I think Brian, I want to start on the macro, then look
mhm.
at okay, who's actually driving the macro, and then which of those strategies can I easily apply for me. Um, and so Brian, like we're really not trying to help you save 15% on your car insurance, to be honest. Like I'm trying to help you have your biggest month ever, right?
Mm,
That's what gets me up in the morning.
There's a really interesting insight there where understanding of what's happening, again, coming back to our thesis of what the future of commerce is that if you come
Yeah,
into a place where the change in technology is no longer accelerating, but we're coming to a bit of a an equilibrium in the way that technology is applied to e-commerce. I guess it depends on what your thesis is. Then understanding culture, understanding what's happening in the culture and how to adapt to move your brand to be culturally relevant is the future of commerce. So in this
amen.
Barbie or Barbenheimer example, it's a merchandising decision, and it used to take really brilliant people who had keen insight in what's happening in the world to merchandise appropriately to remain culturally relevant.
Yeah,
Now, if you had the right kind of data and you were paying attention to what's happening in the world, uh, maybe you could say, well, it's because of Barbenheimer. It's because of this Barbie moment. Maybe it doesn't even matter anymore. Maybe your understanding of why isn't important. It's looking at signals and saying, well, this is what the world's looking for and what they're buying. And it gives us a new reason to merchandise in a different way.
yeah, and like my co-founder says, the opportunity of a lifetime comes once a month. So in June it was Barbenheimer. Okay, in this right now we're actually we saw a massive kind of back to school push, and we saw some brands actually structure it in a way that made a lot of sense. And we'll see that Q4 is always just the heyday for these types of strategies, right? So it's important to stay current, up to date. It's important to not read yesterday's newspaper. That's why we think you need data for what's going on right now, not a week ago, whatever. By that point, it's too old. And then, kind of to your point, Philip, like it really is this marriage between art and science, right? Like our customer base isn't a bunch of tech nerds, right? They're pirates. They are some of the smartest, craftiest people you know. And we're like, hey, let us be your tech nerds. Let us get you with data. Let's marry the art and science, um, and produce outsized returns.
mm.
Let's maybe talk a little bit more broadly. So what we've been talking about right now is sort of product life cycle,
Yeah,
categories, uh, trends that are happening right now, insights into things like competitors. It
yeah,
seems like this is the type of product that has lots of use cases, right? Including
yeah,
maybe uh, the types and scale of promotion by industry or product category, and
very
like
much.
how to make better decisions around things like offers, promotions, cashback versus rewards, loyalty point. Like,
Yeah,
seems like you might have the pulse on other things. What do you currently offer in that way, or what's on the roadmap for the future?
yeah. So um, we focused an enormous amount on pricing. Okay, and I would say it's probably the area that most customers get wrong initially. Okay. And what people tend to look at is they'll tend to look at brand by brand how they discount, right? So Lululemon was famous for never discounting. Now they discount. Allbirds was famous for never discounting. Now they discount, right? Gymshark is like the most aggressive discounter in the activewear space.
Sure. Yep.
So there's all these strategies. What we found, and what I can tell you from a data perspective, is it's actually less about the brand and it's actually more about the product type. So it's kind of interesting. We see discounts work very well in some product types and very poorly in others. work very well in leggings and very poorly in t-shirts, right? What that typically means is brands can move the needle with very small changes, right? As well as they can ensure that they're not just discounting and lighting good money on fire, good margin, right? So that's kind of one of the things we've tried to do is help people understand that, hey, it's actually less about vertically looking at the brand down. And from a data and correlation perspective, it's actually more about looking sideways at the product type. Um, because the customers are comparing your leggings to someone else's leggings to someone else's
Right.
leggings. They're not comparing your product to your t-shirt or your leggings to your t-shirt, to et cetera. So anyways, kind of changing the way that people look at it, I think has been helpful, and I hope is useful to the listeners.
Hmm.
That's super
There's a
interesting.
Go ahead, Brian.
Oh no, I'm fascinated by this, like on a product by product basis, like how the discounting, like the moving of the needle on discounting is always like a big topic of conversation among retail in general, because discounting has taken over in general.
For
And
sure.
like you said, there was like this weird movement against it. And then even the retailers that said, "Oh, or the brands that said we're never going to discount now are discounting."
Everyone.
Um,
Yeah.
right. Do you think this also has to do with like the maturity of a specific category, or is it genuinely just about the like specific product type?
Yeah, I actually think it's more closely related to how people feel about kind of the macro view, to be honest. Like we've seen this
Mm,
shift every year we've done business. We've seen this go more and more this direction, that it feels like people are a little more sensitive with their dollars than they were before, right? Looking for a deal more than they were before. Toby from Shopify recently said that they'd seen customers kind of move down to the next bucket. So if they were buying the really expensive leggings, now they're buying just the expensive. And if they're buying the expensive, now they're buying the. So we've totally seen that from our perspective as well. And so it's very important to understand where you are in the space and what strategies will work for your customers. So let me give you one example. Brand Rad Power Bikes, right? Sells those
Hmm.
electric bikes. They
Seattle
crush.
based. Let's
Brand
go.
Seattle based,
Brian's a
baby.
fan. Yeah.
Brian's a fan. They crush. They're juggernauts in the e-bike space. Now, what you'll see they've done is they will jack their prices up 3 weeks before, um, 3 weeks before Black Friday sales start, and then they'll discount them down to where they were. Okay, and that works
Don't
so
tell the
well in the e-bike
FTC. They
space.
don't listen to this. It's totally fine.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. They're
Yeah. Yeah.
they're busy going after going after
Yeah.
Amazon
They've
and
got
whatnot.
influencers to chase after. It's Rad's probably off their radar. Um,
Lena Khan, I'm sorry, don't go back. Yeah, but But you'll see it a lot, and that'll work. It works in a lot of instances, right? And so it's being clever. It's kind of that marriage of art and science, like we talked about.
you mentioned in our pre-show that there's some really good examples of retailers that didn't, didn't have successful product launches. I think like Allbirds is a good example of
Yeah,
the types of industry stories or case studies where uh, understanding their customer didn't necessarily translate to understanding a new market they were entering, and maybe you
totally.
could catch us up on some of that kind of a use case.
Yeah, we can definitely use Allbirds as kind of a microcosm of kind of the bigger issue, and so I should probably preface this with when I first got into tech and I moved to Silicon Valley, coming from rural Utah. Um, Kind of the first thing my boss made me do was go to this really weird boutique outlet. It was like in a terrible location. It looked like it was in someone's house, and pick out a pair of Allbirds. Now that was like initiation, okay, for being in tech. And so I've been a massive fan of the business ever since, still am. Okay. Um, and as they've kind of grown and launched these product categories, I just remember we had all the data to sit there and say, do not do that. Like this is a bad area to get into. And I would email their CEO and others and like, I will give this to you for free. Please just don't do this. Because it was total, you could totally see it in advance, right? It was totally obvious that these were industries with that were not growing very quickly. Okay. And so they've publicly stated on recent earnings calls that, previous product changes have really impacted kind of the returns they've been able to provide to to investors. And so I think it's important to learn from, examples like that, even some of the best brands in our D2C industry, right? Some of the real greats, the OGs,
Hmm.
learn from their example and make sure we can do better next time.
What are some of those things that you're gearing up for, and what are you looking for in the next few
Yeah.
months as we go into Black Friday, Cyber Monday to partner with brands?
Yeah, so I'll kind of offer some suggestions and kind of try and not talk our book, so to speak. So I found there's some great free tools everyone should be aware of. There's a company called, well, I think it's like a one-man developer, but called Mill.com, to where you can actually subscribe to and see all of your competitors' kind of emails and what kind of offers they're going with, right? Obviously, follow them on Instagram and see kind of where they're going, what's working there. So I'd initially tell people to start with all the free tools they have access to, right? Google Trends, Mill.com, Instagram, and then TikTok. Now we've seen kind of take hold as well. Those are the four I would tell you to really pay attention to. I also think it's important to focus on, three or four brands. We've had some customers who are focusing on 100, 200, really difficult, just because, I mean, you're trying to fill orders, you're trying to, like, you're running a business, right? You maybe have a little bit of time a week for this. So pick a few that you emulate, that you want to become like, follow their strategies, and you'll typically get pretty awesome results.
Do you have some examples of brands that have done this well in your portfolio?
Yeah, so what we saw last Black Friday actually was, it was kind of interesting. We saw kind of two groups. Okay. Some brands actually crushed it, to be honest, and some brands got massacred. And it was funny. You'd see articles of people being like, "This is the best Black Friday ever." Like, I don't know what J Pal's talking about. And you'd see brands like, "This was horrible. The world's ending." Right.
Hmm.
And what we found when we kind of researched into it and looked deeper is it was very much tied to how they were portraying Black Friday. And I'll go back to Gymshark. Gymshark was one of the best performing activewear brands last Black Friday. What they did is they had this bright yellow when you landed on their site, 60% off, right? And now it actually wasn't 60% off. There were like three products that were 60% off, but they really leaned into it, right? And that strategy just worked. And so follow the people you emulate, use them as inspiration to come up with your own ideas. And I think you'll do very well.
Hmm. Love that.
That's
Yeah,
sound
Gymshark.
advice.
I've definitely bought from Gymshark on Black Friday because they are the most aggressive discounter in activewear.
It gets
And
Brian. That it's perfect. It's like caramel center for Brian. It really is.
Deep discounts, strong brands combined. Wow.
what you know God bless capitalism.
Yeah.
And Brian, I'll tell you, like, I was watching the data come in, and so I don't have the visual cues that, like, and I'm just like, why are they crushing it? Like, they're killing it. And then when you go to the website, you're like, oh, that's why.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's
Mhm.
also funny because Brian has we're probably a little more artistic than your average media company in the e-commerce space, but Brian wrote a whole a bod as a sonnet or a lament about his feeling that Black Friday has become sort of soulless for him, and yet Gymshark can still get him to convert. It's an
To be fair,
incredible.
that was like 2 or 3 years ago.
It's true. I writing a lament in 2020. Say less, Brian. Um, it's been great to have you, Josh. Where can
Yeah,
people
thanks,
find out
guys.
more about Particle, and how can they get onto the platform?
Yeah, just come on to particle.com, fill out a demo request. We'll get to you same day. Our process is generally, we'll actually also include a little trial with that as well. So you can get your hands in, you can see some live data without ever agreeing to longer term contract, which is wonderful. So yep, particle.com, fill out a demo, and we'll get back to you same day.
We have a special landing page for Future Commerce listeners. It's Future Commerce.
Slash
So
future
it's
commerce.
slash future particle PARTICL. Uh, .com/future commerce. It's been great,
Perfect.
Josh. Wonderful to have you, Josh Wilson. He's the CEO and co-founder of Particle, and we appreciate anything that gives people a greater insight into what is around the next corner. I think maybe this is one way to see around the next corner if you're looking into that competitive intelligence piece of your business. Check out Particle.
Thanks, guys. It was fun.
Yeah,
Thanks
thanks,
for
Josh.
listening. You can find more episodes of this podcast and other future commerce properties. We've got Decoded is in full swing. We are decoding the way that products get made in the world. Maybe that's a great pairing. Brian, you love a wine pairing. Maybe this is a great pairing with this episode of the podcast. You can find that at Decoded. Season 2 is live now over at futurecommerce.com. Of course, we have The Senses, which is your human connection to what's happening in the world of brands and retail news and what to make of that. You can find all of this in one convenient location by subscribing futurecommerce.com/subscribe. Thank you for listening to this episode of Future Commerce. We'll see you in Miami, December 6th through 8th for Art Basel. Make sure that you go check that out. Brands are our modern muses, and we'll see you at Art Basel, December 6th through 8th.